The maesters tell us that Aegon came to Westeros with fire and blood, and hammered 6 kingdoms into one. Fire he undoubtedly brought, as the kings of the Rock, Reach, and Iron Islands learned. Aegon's own son, Maegor the Cruel, was killed by the very Iron Throne his father had forged, if you believe the tales. If you don't, then perhaps the Cruel is not a wise name for a king to earn. Daeron, first of his name, tried to finish his ancestors' work and bring Dawn into the fold. For his efforts, he lost 60,000 men and his own life of 18 years. During the Great Targaryen Civil War, known as the Dance of the Dragons, a king and queen each vied for the throne, dividing their house and its dragons against each other. Eventually, the queen was fed to her rival's dragon while her son watched, and the victorious king soon died of his own wounds. By the war's end, King's Landing was smashed, cities razed and sacked, never to be rebuilt, and dragons had faded from this world.
For centuries, the Kingsguard had been the glory of the realm. Aegon the Conqueror had established the Order as his personal guardians after uniting Westeros with fire and blood. He knew that some of his subjects wouldn't take to conquest, and his dragons were no use against knives in the dark. No doubt surrounding himself with the greatest knights in Westeros made his rule more palatable and less foreign as well. Everyone in his kingdom soon knew the names and sung the songs of the Kingsguard. I certainly did from my earliest days.
There was one Kingsguard, I forgot the bastard's name, who swore an oath to his dying Targaryen king to crown his daughter after him. The very night that king died, this Kingsguard crowned the king's son instead. When an old man on the small council dared to protest, this honourable knight opened his throat. Bastard died in the very civil war he started, along with the old king's son, daughter, and most of their dragons. And the Kingsguard? All that duty and honour, and not enough brains to figure out which Targaryen to give it to. Twin brothers even ended up on opposite sides, died with tears on their cheeks as they cut each other down. I suppose I should think that's tragic, but stupid men do stupid things every day, and nobody cries over them.
As little more than a boy, Sir Criston Cole replaced the legendary Sir Ryam Redwine on the Kingsguard and soon rose to Lord Commander. But knights only know one way to settle disputes. When Prince Aegon's father died, Sir Criston slit the throat of an advisor who objected to Aegon's ascension over his aunt, the anointed heir. His actions so pleased the new king, Aegon, second of his name, that he appointed Sir Criston as his hand in the ensuing civil war, called the Dance of Dragons. Neither Sir Criston nor the king, nor even the Targaryen dragons would survive it.
The Targaryen dynasty united the Seven Kingdoms and lasted nearly 3 centuries. It was a dynasty forged in fire, sealed in blood, and destroyed by rebellion. The Targaryens are blood of the dragon, descended from the nobility of ancient Valyria, a once mighty empire in the east. When the cataclysmic doom laid waste to Valyria and its people, the Targaryens survived, having settled on the island fortress of Dragonstone years before. They remained there for a century, until the rise of Aegon the Conqueror. Instead of attempting to reclaim the eastern lands of his ancestors, Aegon sailed west for the Seven Kingdoms, his sisters Visenya and Rhaenys at his side. To keep the bloodlines pure, Aegon continued the custom of his Valyrian ancestors and took both of his sisters to wife. Together, they came ashore on the eastern coast of Westeros, their blazon a dragon with 3 heads, representing Aegon and his sister wives. Their words, fire and blood. While their host was small in comparison to the armies of Westeros that awaited them, Aegon and his sisters had a secret weapon, the last of the dragons. He conquered every kingdom save Dawn, which eventually bowed to Targaryen rule a century later. He had the swords of his enemies melted down by the fiery breath of his dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, and forged into the Iron Throne. The capital city of King's Landing was built on the eastern coast, where Aegon and his sisters first came ashore, and Aegon ordered the construction of a royal castle on its highest hill, the Red Keep.
Aegon built his castle of red rock to remind people of the fires he'd roasted his enemies in. So whenever King's Landing looked up, they'd see the price of defiance. He knew the first rule of kings. Only fear keeps men in line. Fear and punishment. Then again, torture chambers are just so private. Better to punish your enemies where everyone can see and remember. Like that Targaryen who forced his nephew to watch as he fed the boy's traitor mother to a dragon. Oh, what I could do with a dragon.
The stories claim that the Old Way died with Herne the Black and his sons at Harrenhal. Our ships and axes were no match for Aegon's dragons, so our ancestors bent their steel into fishhooks and our kingdom into villages, and started telling the red tales around the fire of how we used to be strong, and how one day we would be so again. Generations later, a young boy listened to them. Dalton Greyjoy, the wild young heir to Pike, was rowing at 5 and reeving at 10 in the Basilisk Isles with his uncle. By 14, Dalton had sailed as far as Old Geese, fought in 12 battles, and claimed 4 soft wives. In his 15th year, he avenged his uncle's death in battle, but he took 12 wounds and emerged from the fight, drenched head to heel in blood. From that day forth, men called him the Red Kraken. During the Dance of Dragons, the Red Kraken picked the side that was fighting the Lannisters, and fell upon the Westerlands while the Lannisters were up at war. Casterly Rock itself proved too strong, once the lady of the castle barred its gates. But the Ironborn burned the Lannister fleet, and sacked Lannisport, carrying off gold, grain, and hundreds of women and girls, including Lord Lannister's favorite mistress, and all his bastards. The Red Kraken now ruled the Sunset Sea as his forebears had, and his longships again brought the Old Way to the coast of Westeros. But then the war ended, and the mainland armies came home. The Iron Throne commanded the Red Kraken to stop reeving, and when he didn't, a mistress opened his throat as he slept. While his son squabbled, the Lannisters sent their soldiers to the Iron Islands. Thousands of men, women, and children were put to the sword, and scores of villages and hundreds of longships were put to the torch. The glorious return to the Old Way had lasted almost 2 years.
In its time, the Dragon Pit was a marvel of the world. Full-grown Targaryen dragons nested beneath its massive dome, and even on the darkest nights, the walls seemed to glow with the fire of the great beasts inside.
As had the site's previous occupant, the Sept of Remembrance, when Maegor the Cruel blasted it with dragonfire during morning prayers. The screams of the dying men echoed through King's Landing all day, and a pall of ash and smoke hung over the city for a week.
But as it dissipated, so too did the rebellion of the Faith Militant. The Sept of Remembrance faded from memory, and Maegor decided to replace a monument to the gods with a monument to his family, the Dragon Pit.
Labor proved elusive, however, for after the Red Keep was finished, Maegor had hosted a 3-day feast for all the builders, stonemasons, and carpenters who had worked to build it. At its conclusion, he slaughtered them, so that only he would know the castle's secrets. So many men fled the construction of the Dragon Pit that Maegor was forced to employ the prisoners of the city dungeons, supplemented by skilled and ignorant builders from across the narrow sea.
For more than a century, the Targaryens housed their dragons in the Dragon Pit. But dragons are not horses to be stabled or hounds to be kennelled. With each generation, the dragons became less massive, less swift, less long-lived.
And less invulnerable. During the Dance of Dragons, 2 Targaryen factions killed a handful of their family's dragons while fighting each other. A frenzied mob even broke into the Dragon Pit and slaughtered the 5 dragons chained there, though the last managed to bring down the roof of the Great Dome on its assailants. The dragons never recovered their former strength or numbers. Perhaps their line had been too broken, or perhaps others intervened to break it further. But the last dragon grew no larger than a cat, and its death earned Aegon, third of his name, the epithet Dragonbane.